We'll call the regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order. Today's October 17th, 2018. We've already had the Pledge of Allegiance this evening, so I'll ask for any additional agenda or consent items.
I'll move to add agenda item 6A, executive session for the purpose of discussing real estate matters.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further comment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Terrific. Delegations. Anyone? Yes, Camille?
Good evening, Camille Alberti, 7 Darrows Court, and I am also a member of the Board of Finance. And I'm here this evening to talk about the agenda item for the purchasing plan. I know the Board of Finance has been asking for such a plan for approximately 2.5 years. That's as far back as I can remember. Perhaps it's gone back farther than that. I'm not aware of it. And 2.5 years later, it's my understanding that we still don't have an approved plan. Let me just back up a second. I think Ann Santoro and Bill Weber, perhaps Mark Salerno is working on it, and
Dan Cunningham.
Dan.
Yep.
Thank you very much. You know, this is very important to several members of the Board of Finance because it gives us some parameters over which we can make decisions or judgment calls. I guess my concern is that this is one policy, 2.5 years. And I just recently got an email from Anna indicating about 60 policies that we probably need to get through and develop or hone or, clarify. If they don't exist, create them. So if I extrapolate 60 policies by 2.5 years, right, what are we looking at? 150 years. We, as a town, I don't really think that's acceptable. We have to do something to increase the level of productivity from these boards. Otherwise, we face the stigma of just any old government body taking our time, not really caring how long it takes. I think we're better than that as a town people. We have lots of volunteers, lots of good people that are willing to step up and do something. So my understanding from the Board of Finance meeting last week was that there might be one stipulation holding this up, and that's the threshold with which we go out to bid. So I understand that the state statutes don't mandate that we go out to bid. If it's over $25,000, that's up to the municipality. But just because they don't stipulate that, it doesn't make it right. It really doesn't. When Mark and I look at our home projects and it involves big dollars, we usually go out to bid. We usually get 3 bids on anything that we do. If we don't, because we're tired, our jobs are too consuming, we rely on past contractors that we have a relationship with, well, that's on us. That's our money, and that's within our right to do that. But when you're talking about going out to bid for a government contract, a municipality contract, that's not your money. That's not our money. That's taxpayer money. And we are only stewards of those funds, and we have to do the absolute best that we can. So if you take a look at the state government, what is it, $20 billion a year for their annual budget? And I just did a little research here. Connecticut general statutes. Direct purchases of any types of goods or services up to $2,500, also known as open market purchases, may be made without obtaining quotations or bids. You probably know this, I'm just stating it for the record. Purchases over $2,500 and up to $10,000 annually must be based upon, when possible, at least 3 written quotations or bids. So this is the state with a $20 billion annual budget. And we're a town with a $70 million annual budget, and we want to be able to go up to $50,000 before we have to go out and get 3 bids. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a good representation to our taxpayers. And again, just because we don't have to do it, it doesn't make it right. So if that's the only thing holding up this purchasing plan from getting approved this evening, I hope you really will take that into consideration. I just don't know why we would need to go that high. You know, I understand expediency. I understand, you know, that the bulk of the responsibility for going out to bid resides with a few department heads. But if that's the work that needs to be done, it has to be done. And I think we need to commit to doing that and get this thing passed once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alberti. Anyone else? Mr. Weber?
Bill Weber, 19 Plantsdam, currently the chairman of the Board of Finance. So we frequently see many purchasing requests come before us. And we struggled in the past because town managers would come before us and Board of Ed members would come before us and we would ask if they've quoted it. And the answer was, well, we're not required to do competitive quotes. Or sometimes it's like we talk to different people and things like that. For the Board of Finance, this purchasing policy is important that we have some criteria so that each time somebody comes in front of us with a proposal to purchase whatever, we don't have to ask them, well, you gotta go out and get 2 bids or 3 bids or whatever else. So we tried to stipulate with thresholds. When you came before us with a fire study, it was $1,600. We asked for competitive quotes. We wanna know that that $1,600 is well spent. So yes, I was on the subcommittee that wrote this policy. A lot of it's my ink, and it came behind us, but we all came together. I wanted that threshold to be $15,000 because I would like to know that we're spending the town's money properly. Kind of more part of that whole wanting to move this thing forward to make a decision is this is a policy. It's not an ordinance, it's not anything firm. So if 3 months from now, 6 months from now, somebody says, boy, this is hard, it's easy to change. It's real easy to make a change to the document. I think just a minor or simple majority is sufficient. So my humble opinion, we need a purchasing policy. We need to get it on the floor. I think lower thresholds are fine. If the process is hard to do multiple quotes, we need to fix the process. If it's really, really hard to get quotes, make it so it's not. So my humble opinion, 2018, we should move forward with what we have, and then in the future, if it wants to be amended, it can be amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Ann? Ann, that's a lot of paper you're bringing up here. Let's not read all of it.
Ann Santoro, Board of Finance, and I also was a member of the subcommittee for putting together the purchasing policy. So I just want to be clear that everyone does have the October 15th draft. Is that what everyone's been, the Board of Selectmen members have?
17th.
Okay, so October 15th is the latest.
So October 17th is what we had.
I guess, yeah, by the time that you printed, but correct. So that's it. There were no other changes.
I don't think there were any changes.
Right. And I hope that from our last meeting that you had an opportunity to look at the summary of the purchasing policy that I did put together. I spoke briefly at 2 meetings ago and for a moment or two at the last one, but that gives you a very good rundown of the purposes of the policy, how it was created, and its most important features. Following our last meeting, Mr. Nickerson and myself, Mr. Burgaw, Mr. Scheer, met with Ed O'Connell, our town attorney, And there were a couple of changes which were reflected in this most recent draft that you have. I won't belabor them here because they're not really of grand consequence, and they usually appear in red if that's the version that you do have. You know, the matter of the threshold was something that the threshold for sealed bidding in particular, was discussed at the meeting. And the proposed policy, as you know, sets this for goods and services above $25,000. As you know, there are four categories or thresholds. And just generally speaking, thresholds are really critical to purchasing policies. In fact, I'd say that that's one of the main reasons why one would write a purchasing policy or a town would want to have one. So it's important that we're all on board with what these thresholds are. The threshold of the $25,000 is in line with, as I mentioned last meeting, Connecticut General Statute, Section 7-148V. And there is no difference in opinion or in reading that I have with Attorney O'Connell. We see that the statute as it's written that it would apply to municipal ordinances, and it sets this $25,000 threshold for sealed bidding, and it's express about sealed bidding, which means formal bidding, and it may not apply to policies. So that being said, and as I said, I agree with him on that. That's my reading. I know our subcommittee members were well aware of that when we discussed the $25,000. The topic came up. Why not 30? Why not 40? You know, why not 100,000? Well, $25,000 is a standard set by the state. So, however, even knowing that we're going after adopting a policy and not coming up with an ordinance, that's what you'll be adopting if you adopt it, the recommendation by the subcommittee was stick with the $25,000 for sealed bidding. So that being said, Attorney O'Connell then left it up to the board, to decide, which as it should, what it would prefer to have as a sealed bidding threshold. So I personally, sitting both as a member of the Board of Finance and as a member of that subcommittee, my work began in January of this past year. I was primarily an editor more than coming up with many of the very nice and good provisions and helpful provisions in this policy. But my advice or my urging would be keep that sealed bidding threshold at $25,000 for formal bids. And I have 4 reasons. First, the proposed policy or plan is really a small step away from being an ordinance. The only thing that separates it from being an ordinance is your town meeting, if I'm reading our charter correctly. So both of these things are adopted by the Board of Selectmen. Most importantly, we'd be adhering to the state statute and its purpose, which is to secure the integrity of the municipal bidding process. And I'd like to just put those words in quotes, securing the integrity of the municipal bidding process. The little bit of case law that there is on this, that sentence comes up and is repeated. So there is a purpose behind this statute. So good that we could adhere to it. And in fact, this explains why, practically speaking, forget the statutes, the law, and all that, when one looks at other town policies, which we did ad nauseum, we haven't found greater amounts than this $25,000 for the sealed bid threshold. They might be out there. I cannot say that I looked at 169 towns and looked at everyone's policies. Some don't even have policies, obviously. But the ones that we did, many of which we obtained copies from directly from the towns or through CCM, had a $25,000 or less, and many times less, as our chair of the, Bill Weber, has just mentioned, and preferring that, less than $25,000. So that's the reality. In addition to that, I myself, and I've said this before, pick the brains of, for lack of a better expression, a number of municipal finance professionals who I met by way of seminars I went to, or whatever. And I just ran the thought by them. What about this statute? What about going higher? And no one advised going higher. So that I can tell you. And the individuals I spoke with teach municipal finance. So some of them do, and have been in the profession for some time. So that was pretty strong evidence for me of what would be a preferred amount. If I was going to sit on a subcommittee and recommend what you should try to adopt, that is something that I took to heart. My third reason is that I did hear primarily from our Public Works Department and from Mr. Burgaw about some of the difficulties of having this, adopting this policy, and that there would be manpower issues, additional expenses, and some related issues. And I'm not discounting that. I'm not standing here telling you I don't believe his complaint, as it were. I think that it may very well be a reality. For me, it's just not. It's not overwhelming or sufficiently convincing to me to somehow bypass this $25,000 threshold because of one situation within the town. And in fact, at the last meeting, after it was, I thought, very helpful, it seemed to me, and I can be corrected on this, that there is a sort of hybrid sealed bidding process that's going on. So in the neighborhood of $25,000, there's often sealed bids that do go out, and yet they may not go out via advertisement, let's say to the entire universe, but they may go out to a long list of preferred vendors, which is a totally valid approach in procurement. Most towns do have lists that they keep of preferred vendors. So I just think that, to me, it's not that much of a net